4 hours ago, something happened 240 million kilometers from Earth that no equation in the history of science can explain. Not a theory, not a simulation, a documented, verified, multi-instrument observation that has sent shockwaves through every major space agency on the planet. NASA has gone silent. The United Nations is currently holding an emergency session. And the data streaming in right now from the James Webb Space Telescope is showing something that physicists are struggling to even find words for. This is not a drill. This is not speculation. This is March 12th, 2026, and the universe just broke its own rules. At exactly 8:14 UTC this morning, the LIGO-Virgo-KAGRA gravitational wave network, the most sensitive detection system humanity has ever built, picked up a signal that had no business existing. Not a black hole collision, not a neutron-star merger. Something far more unsettling. A localized, violent rupture in the fabric of spacetime itself, originating directly from the coordinates of 3I Atlas. Within seconds, NASA's Deep Space Network redirected the Goldstone antenna to lock onto the source. What the engineers found waiting for them on those screens has produced an unprecedented silence at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any alarm. Here is what we are dealing with. For months, 3I Atlas was being studied as an unusual comet, then reclassified as an anomaly. Scientists argued about its composition, its trajectory, its interstellar origin. But what happened at 8:14 UTC this morning was not an orbital adjustment. It was not a gas eruption. It was a puncture. The James Webb Space Telescope's NIRCam instrument, whose data arrived just minutes ago, captured something that defies every framework we have. A region of absolute zero-point energy forming directly behind the object. No mass, no gravity well, no light bending, just a patch of space where space itself has ceased to function. To appreciate why this is so deeply disturbing, consider this. A black hole, terrifying as it is, still follows rules. It has mass, it curves light, it obeys general relativity. But what Webb is showing us behind 3I Atlas is something categorically different. It is a void, not in the poetic sense, but in the literal physical sense. A region where the background star field has not been blocked or dimmed but erased. Stars that existed in that part of the sky for billions of years are simply gone. The cosmic microwave background radiation, the ancient afterglow of the Big Bang that fills every corner of the universe, is registering at absolute mathematical zero in that zone. And quantum mechanics explicitly forbids that. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle states, there must always be fluctuations, always some residual energy. Yet the data from the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia, confirmed independently by NASA's DSS, 4-3 antenna and the ALMA array in Chile, shows a complete and total absence of everything. 3 separate observatories. 3 different methodologies. 1 identical, impossible conclusion. The vacuum of space at those coordinates has collapsed. And as you are watching this right now, it is not staying still. It is growing. What started as a blip on a secondary sensor has become the most consequential dataset in the history of astrophysics, and the timeline of how we got here over just 4 terrifying hours is something you need to understand in full, because every minute of it changes the picture entirely. To truly grasp the scale of what is unfolding, you need to walk through the timeline minute by minute, because this did not begin at 8:14. The warning signs appeared hours earlier, and every single one of them was dismissed as instrumentation error until the evidence became too overwhelming to ignore. The story of 3I Atlas on March 12, 2026, begins at 4:12 UTC, 4 hours before the main rupture, when the European Space Agency's Gaia Observatory quietly logged something strange. Gaia's entire purpose is precision. It maps the positions of billions of stars across the galaxy with extraordinary accuracy, tracking tiny gravitational distortions caused by massive objects passing in front of distant light sources. This is called microlensing, and Einstein predicted it over a century ago. When a massive object moves between us and a background star, gravity bends that star's light like a cosmic lens, creating a distinctive brightening effect. Gaia has observed this thousands of times, but at 4:12 UTC, it observed the opposite. Instead of the background stars behind 3I Atlas warping and brightening as expected, a circular region approximately 4,000 kilometers in diameter simply went dark. No dimming, no redshift, no lensing signature at all. the light from those stars did not bend, it stopped. For the next hour and a half, astronomers attempted to explain this away. Calibration errors were checked, software was restarted. But at 5:45 UTC, when the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia was directed at the same coordinates, the mystery deepened into something genuinely alarming. The cosmic microwave background signal, that ever-present static hum of the Big Bang that permeates every direction you can possibly point a radio telescope, dropped to absolute zero at those coordinates. Not near zero. Not a faint whisper. Absolute, mathematical zero. This is a direct violation of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, one of the foundational pillars of quantum mechanics. The universe does not permit perfect emptiness. There must always be quantum fluctuations, virtual particles constantly blinking in and out of existence. Yet that region behind 3I Atlas contained nothing. No photons, no radio waves, no X-rays, no quantum noise, just a perfect, impossible absence. By 6:10 UTC, NASA's Deep Space Network antenna DSS-43 independently confirmed the anomaly. 2 minutes later, Gaia cross-verified the vanishing star field. The ALMA telescope array in Chile ran its own thermal analysis and returned the same result. 3 independent instruments, built by different agencies, using entirely different detection methods, all arriving at the same conclusion simultaneously. This was no longer a calibration issue. Something was genuinely and profoundly wrong with that region of space. Then at 7:30 UTC, the situation escalated sharply. The trajectory of 3I Atlas changed. For months, scientists had tracked this object along a hyperbolic path that strongly suggested it had originated from outside our solar system entirely, a visitor from interstellar space. But at 7:30 UTC, it decelerated. Suddenly, without explanation. Newton's first law of motion is not a suggestion. An object moving through the vacuum of deep space does not slow down unless something exerts force upon it. There was no detected collision, no observed outgassing that could function as a natural thruster. Yet Doppler radar data from the Goldstone Solar System radar clearly recorded a velocity drop of 12 kilometers per second in an instant. The math behind that deceleration is staggering. To slow an object estimated at 33 billion tons by that magnitude requires energy equivalent to 500 megatons of TNT. And that energy produced no explosion, no heat signature, no shock wave. It simply vanished, absorbed into the growing void forming behind the object. 3I Atlas was not just creating that hole in space, it was feeding it. At 7:55 UTC, astronomers at the Keck Observatory in Hawaii added another layer to this already staggering picture. They had been tracking 3I Atlas in the infrared spectrum throughout the deceleration event, and what their instruments captured during that window was visually unlike anything in the observational record. The space surrounding the object began to lens in reverse. Under normal circumstances, gravity acts as a magnifying lens, bending light inward toward a massive object and brightening anything behind it. But the region around 3I Atlas was doing the opposite. Light was being pushed away from the center, dispersed outward as if the object were surrounded by something with repulsive gravitational properties. There is only one thing in theoretical physics that produces this effect: negative energy density. For decades, physicists have discussed exotic matter with negative mass as a purely mathematical concept, something that appears in the equations but has never been observed in the real world. It is the theoretical fuel required to stabilize a traversable wormhole. It is the foundational ingredient in the Alcubierre warp drive equations. It cannot be manufactured by any process found in nature. Stars cannot produce it. Supernovae cannot generate it. Particle accelerators have only managed to create infinitesimally tiny amounts under extraordinarily controlled laboratory conditions using the Casimir effect, a quantum trick involving two metal plates held nanometers apart. Yet the region behind 3I Atlas was exhibiting negative energy density across a structure 4,000 kilometers wide, stable, and actively expanding. This is when the question fundamentally shifted. Scientists were no longer asking what 3I Atlas was made of. They were asking who built it, because nature does not construct negative energy stabilizers. The laws of physics, as we understand them, do not allow for a naturally occurring object to manufacture exotic matter and deploy it across thousands of kilometers of open space. The level of engineering implied by these observations corresponds to what physicist Nikolai Kardashev described as a Type 2 or Type 3 civilization on his famous scale, a society capable of harnessing the total energy output of a star, or perhaps an entire galaxy, and treating the fundamental laws of physics not as constraints, but as tools to be used and set aside at will. Then at 8 UTC, 14 minutes before the main rupture event, something happened that extended the mystery far beyond the location of 3I Atlas itself. The Voyager 1 spacecraft, currently traveling through interstellar space, more than 24 billion kilometers from Earth, in the opposite direction from 3I Atlas, transmitted a routine telemetry packet. Buried in that data was a spike from the probe's magnetometer, its magnetic field sensor, that occurred at the exact same moment the void opened behind 3I Atlas. Let the implication of that sink in fully. An event occurring in the inner solar system triggered a measurable response in a probe located in interstellar space with zero time delay between the two. That is a direct violation of the speed of light. Information cannot travel faster than light. Yet something connected these two events instantaneously across 24 billion kilometers of space. The only framework in physics that permits this kind of instantaneous correlation across vast distances is quantum entanglement. Whatever 3I Atlas was doing at that moment, it was not affecting just its local neighborhood. It was affecting the entire heliosphere simultaneously. At 8:14 UTC, the rupture occurred. The LIGO-Virgo-KAGRA network registered the gravitational wave signature. The European Space Agency's Gaia Observatory simultaneously recorded a gravitational anomaly of 0.004 micronewtons acting on Earth itself. That number sounds small, but for an object 240 million kilometers away to exert any instantaneous measurable force on our planet violates the cosmic speed limit entirely. The data from the Hanford interferometer and the KAGRA detector in Japan showed identical waveforms and identical timestamps. This was not a sensor malfunction. This was real. By 8:30 UTC, 16 minutes after the rupture, the Very Large Array Radio Telescope in New Mexico detected something that no model had predicted and no scientist had prepared for. A coherent electromagnetic pulse was emerging from the center of the void. Not scattered radiation, not the broadband noise of a natural explosion, a focused narrowband radio signal at precisely 1,420 MHz. That specific frequency is not arbitrary. It is the emission frequency of neutral hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe, and it has been recognized by the scientific community since the 1950s as the most logical channel for interstellar communication. SETI researchers call it the cosmic waterhole, the universal frequency that any technologically advanced civilization would know to monitor, and it was coming from inside the void. Consider the compounded improbability of what was now being observed. The probability of a natural comet emitting a focused narrowband signal at the hydrogen frequency is statistically zero. The probability of that same object simultaneously generating a region of stable negative energy density is also statistically zero. The probability of both occurring in the same object at the same time is so astronomically remote that it defies any framework of coincidence. Avi Loeb, the Harvard astronomer who has spent years making the scientific case for taking extraterrestrial intelligence seriously, stated publicly this morning that if the Gaia data is accurate, humanity is witnessing an engineering project, not a celestial event. When a scientist of that standing uses those words, and when NASA simultaneously issues emergency orders to reorient the Hubble Space Telescope, the situation demands the most serious possible attention. To understand the physics of why this is so extraordinary, consider the energy requirements involved. General relativity describes spacetime as a flexible fabric, warped by mass and energy, the way a heavy object deforms a stretched sheet. Creating a black hole, the most extreme natural warping of that fabric, requires the gravitational collapse of a massive star. But a black hole works by curving space downward with enormous mass and gravity. What is happening behind 3I Atlas is the opposite. Space is being curved upward, pushed against the vacuum, expanded rather than compressed. In string theory, this is called a topological defect, and producing it artificially requires exotic matter with negative mass. A substance that does not appear on the periodic table, does not exist in stars, and by every model we have, can only be manufactured through processes we have not yet developed. The energy required to open and stabilize even a small traversable wormhole, just a few meters across, is theoretically equivalent to the entire mass of Jupiter converted to pure energy through Einstein's famous equation. 3. I-Atlas, by every prior assessment, was a cold, dark, inert rock. And yet, here was the data. At 8:45 UTC, a new development was confirmed that removed any remaining ambiguity about whether this object was behaving naturally. For the entire duration of its tracked approach, 3I Atlas had been tumbling through space in the chaotic, irregular rotation typical of any uncontrolled rocky body. But at 8:45 UTC, it stopped tumbling. Its rotation ceased entirely, and its axis aligned with the precise center of the void it had created. The alignment accuracy was within 0.002 degrees, a margin so exact it was verified 3 separate times before being reported. An inert rock cannot choose its own orientation. It cannot arrest its own spin without external thrust. It cannot point itself with laser precision at a tear in spacetime. This kind of controlled, deliberate alignment implies one thing with no room for alternative interpretation. An active guidance system. Something aboard 3I Atlas made a decision and executed it with mechanical precision. Meanwhile, at 9 UTC, the void itself underwent a transformation. The Spitzer Space Telescope sensors detected a faint glow emanating from inside the void, but it was not thermal radiation from heat, and it was not reflected starlight. The spectral signature matched a theoretical phenomenon that physicists have discussed for decades but never observed. White hole radiation, the inverse counterpart of Hawking radiation emitted by black holes. A white hole, in theory, is the temporal opposite of a black hole. Nothing can enter it. Only matter and energy can exit. It is, in the most literal sense, an output, a faucet, and something was beginning to flow through it into our solar system. At 9:15 UTC, the radiation levels inside the void spiked, and the structure began to pulse with a rhythmic regularity that bore no resemblance to any natural emission pattern. At 9:42 UTC, something happened that forced every remaining conventional explanation off the table entirely. The void moved, not with 3I Atlas. Ahead of it, the tear in spacetime that had formed behind the object accelerated away from it, pulling the object along in its wake. A shadow follows the object that casts it. A wave follows the vessel that generates it. But this void, this rupture in the fabric of reality, detached from its source and led the way. The Arecibo successor observatory confirmed through Doppler shift analysis that the void shifted its position by 40,000 kilometers in under 3 seconds, a velocity exceeding the solar system's escape speed. This means the void is not a passive byproduct of whatever 3I Atlas is doing. It is a propulsion mechanism. The theoretical framework that best matches everything observed across these 6 hours is the Alcubierre warp drive, a mathematical model first described by physicist Miguel Alcubierre in 1994. The concept works by compressing spacetime in front of a vessel and expanding it behind, allowing the ship to effectively surf a wave in the fabric of reality without technically moving through space at all, thereby bypassing the speed of light limitation. The negative energy, the void expanding behind 3I Atlas, the object's impossible deceleration, followed by acceleration beyond escape velocity, all of it maps cleanly onto the theoretical signature of a functioning warp bubble. The data is not suggesting this possibility. The data is insisting on it. At 10 UTC, NASA took an action that has occurred only a handful of times in 6 decades of space exploration. They severed the live data feed from the Silver Dynamics Observatory without explanation and went completely dark. In an era where space agencies pride themselves on real-time transparency, this blackout speaks with enormous weight. The final data frame transmitted before the feed was cut showed the void expanding again, and within that expansion, the Hubble Space Telescope spectrometer captured a fleeting measurement of the material inside the void. The chemical signature was not rocky. It was not icy. It was metallic, processed, a refined alloy, consistent with manufactured construction rather than natural formation. NASA has not commented. The feed remains offline. What remains fully documented and verifiable from the 6 hours of observations prior to the blackout constitutes 4 facts that no current model of physics can simultaneously accommodate. First, at 8:14 UTC, a stable void formed behind 3I Atlas in direct violation of vacuum energy laws. Second, at 8:45 UTC, the object halted its rotation and aligned with the void center to within 0.002 degrees, violating conservation of angular momentum without any observed pulsive force. Third, at 9:42 UTC, the void accelerated independently of the object, displaying the exact theoretical signature of an Alcubierre warp drive. Fourth, immediately after detecting a metallic spectral signature inside the void, NASA terminated public observation access. The one question that the emergency UN briefing currently underway is carefully navigating around is the most important one. Where is the void pointing? Because the Very Large Array in Chile has confirmed that the warp bubble is aligning itself with the ecliptic plane of our solar system, the flat disk in which all the planets orbit the Sun. If this is a natural phenomenon, we are approaching the most catastrophic gravitational disruption our solar system has experienced since its formation. If this is an unmanned probe from a civilization operating beyond our comprehension of physics, then first contact is not a future event. It is happening now. And if the void is a stable Einstein Rosen bridge, a genuine wormhole connecting two points in spacetime, then the distance between 3I Atlas and Earth is no longer 240 million kilometers. Effectively, it is zero. Right now, as you watch this, the Parkes radio telescope in Australia is actively listening to the signal emerging from the void, and it is no longer random noise. It has resolved into a carrier wave, a structured, repeating pattern. Something that sounds, to every instrument trained on it, like a countdown. In less than 4 hours, 3I Atlas reaches its calculated perihelion. The telescopes are locked on, the detectors are live, the void is expanding. And whatever 3I Atlas is bringing through that hole in the fabric of space, we are about to find out. If this video reached you, share it immediately. Subscribe so you receive the live update the moment new data breaks. Drop your analysis in the comments, because right now, the most important conversation happening on this planet is the one about what comes next. The instruments are recording, the clock is running, and the universe is no longer keeping its secrets.